In the golden haze of late October 1998, beneath the restless heartbeat of Paris where centuries of footsteps have shaped the very bones of the city, two souls, Eva Zu, a fiercely curious 33-year-old urban photographer with a hunger for forgotten truths, and Nate, her 31-year-old partner, a thoughtful and quiet observer of life who had learned to trust Eva's instincts more than he trusted any map. Stepped through a rusted, graffiti-covered steel door near Rue du Château, ducked beneath a crumbling arch, and descended into the forbidden veins of the city, where light was a stranger and the air felt older than memory itself. They weren't tourists looking for thrills or a story to tell over coffee. They were seekers, restless minds drawn not to the polished corridors of the official catacombs where bones are arranged like museum exhibits but to the illegal, raw, winding tunnels that breathe with moisture and time, to the places etched only on whispered maps passed from hand to hand beneath flickering candlelight, and as they moved deeper, lanterns swinging gently between them and camcorder humming softly, they documented each careful step, each strange sound that echoed just a second too long, and each eerie silence that pressed against their ears like something unseen was listening from just beyond the dark. Eva, ever the fearless one, traced faded Latin carvings with her fingers, her breath catching with excitement as she filmed markings that hadn't seen daylight in centuries, while Nate, equally mesmerized though more cautious, watched her with quiet admiration, as if even in the thick of the underground, she was the brightest thing in the room, and together they laughed gently in the dimness, unaware that something ancient and cold seemed to move just a few chambers ahead of them, always out of reach, always waiting. The last footage, discovered years later, grainy and warped, showed Eva standing in a circular chamber lined with bones that seemed arranged not by nature or burial custom, but by deliberate, almost ritualistic hands, with cryptic symbols drawn in ash on the stone behind her, and as Nate's voice, barely audible, mentioned a hidden staircase behind the wall, the camcorder slipped, tilted, caught one last shaky glimpse of Eva's silhouette turning sharply towards something unseen, then static, then silence, as if the catacombs themselves had chosen to swallow the moment whole and bury it where no scream could follow. They didn't return that night, and in the days that followed, when calls went unanswered and Eva missed the unveiling of her Montmartre exhibit, something she had spoken of with so much passion, concern turned to alarm, and eventually to dread, as search teams, both official and those from the cataphile underground community, ventured deep into the maze only to come back days later, disoriented, shaken, speaking of shifting tunnels, blocked paths, and the strange, suffocating sense that they were never alone down there, like the tunnels themselves were watching, rearranging, protecting something buried too deep to reach. And so, Paris moved on, as cities do, the couple reduced to whispers in wine bars and stories traded between thrill-seekers. But in the darkness beneath the surface, in that cold, sealed room that no one knew existed, something was still there, waiting, untouched, undisturbed, holding its breath for the moment it would be found. It was in the bitter chill of February 2004, 6 long years after Eva and Nate's vanishing had settled like forgotten dust on cold case files and beneath the indifferent surface of city gossip, that fate stirred again, not through the efforts of investigators or the pleas of family, but through a city maintenance crew sent to reroute a collapsed sewer line near an old, decommissioned metro tunnel in the 14th arrondissement, where vibrations from machinery dislodged part of a sealed wall, revealing behind it a space no one on record had ever mapped, a passage choked with rubble and rot that seemed to lead into a depth untouched even by the oldest of Paris's cataphiles, a void that breathed a chill far colder than the winter air above. At first, the workers thought it was just another collapsed tunnel, another forgotten passage lost to time, but when their flashlights pierced deeper and the dust began to settle, they saw carvings along the stone that didn't match any known inscriptions, spirals and marks not written but scratched, deeply and with urgency, as though someone had tried to record something in the last moments of fear, and at the end of the corridor. Beyond the debris and the silence, there was a door, metal, bolted, and rusted shut from the outside, a door that should have never been there. When authorities were called and the door finally forced open, what lay behind it didn't feel like it belonged to the same world anymore, for it wasn't a room as much as it was a chamber of arrested time, a space so utterly still and untouched that even the air inside clung to the lungs like it remembered those who once breathed it, and there, in the flickering beams of the investigators' lights, were the Polaroids, hundreds of them, each tacked meticulously to the wall, edge to edge, a gallery of moments frozen in fear and intimacy, a silent scream unfolding through still images. Some showed Eva, eyes wide, face smudged with dust, standing in the very chamber now being uncovered. Others showed Nate, his expression wary but holding a forced calm, as if trying to protect Eva with his presence alone. And some showed them together, arms linked, sometimes sitting, sometimes standing, sometimes staring directly at the camera like they knew someone would find them someday. Or maybe like they had hoped every flash might be the last. The one that saved them. But what made the room unbearable, what sent seasoned officers out gasping for air, was that in many of the photos, someone else was there too, not fully in frame, never clearly seen, just hints. A hand at the edge, a shadow stretching wrong, a blur of movement in the background that didn't match the fear in their faces. There were no bones, no blood, no bodies, only photographs, perfectly preserved, terrifyingly silent, and behind the last row of pictures, hidden behind a loose stone, was the camcorder, the same one Nate had carried, its battery long dead but the tape inside still intact, waiting like a ticking heart to be played, to tell whatever it could about what happened in those lost hours, about why they never returned, and who or what had kept them there. When the tape was finally restored and loaded into an old player deep within the forensics lab's basement, far from curious eyes and media frenzy, the room fell into a kind of collective silence, not the awkward quiet of anticipation, but the uneasy stillness of those who somehow knew instinctively that whatever they were about to witness was not meant to be seen. And as the screen came to life with static lines slowly sharpening into the dim interior of the catacombs, the air itself seemed to constrict as if the footage had weight, a heaviness not just of time but of something far more unspoken and buried. At first, the tape revealed what had already been assumed: Eva and Nate walking, laughing softly, whispering to the camera about the damp air and the strange markings they found on the walls, their faces still bright with the kind of wonder that explorers carry before they realize the map has long since failed them. And then, gradually, the footage began to change, not with sudden jumps or distortions, but with subtle shifts. Nate's voice becoming quieter, his glances more frequent over his shoulder, Eva's confidence dimming as she lowered the camera more often and looked into the dark, pausing too long between words as if she had begun to hear things that she couldn't name but could no longer ignore. Then came the sounds, faint at first, almost missed under the crunch of their footsteps, but unmistakably human, breaths not their own, lone murmurs with no speaker in sight, distant tapping like nails against stone, not rhythmic but random, chaotic, as if something far away had no sense of time but knew they were there, and the worst of it was not the noise itself, but the moment when Eva stopped recording Nate and turned the lens slowly toward a narrow corridor ahead where the shadows didn't behave like shadows should, and where a figure, indistinct and motionless, stood with its back to the camera, not reacting, not moving. Not moving, not even breathing, just standing as if it had been waiting for them to arrive all along. The frame shook violently then, the camera falling, the audio exploding into static and sharp gasps, and Nate's voice cutting through in a tone no one had heard from him before, not the calm, even-keeled tone of a partner or protector, but the fractured panic of someone who had seen something that broke the boundary between logic and nightmare. Something not meant to exist, and the screen went black for a moment. Silent except for the static, until it returned briefly, one final time, showing Eva's face illuminated only by the flicker of the lantern, eyes wide, lips trembling, and behind her, the faint outline of hands, not touching, not grabbing, but just reaching, lingering, as if savoring the fear rather than ending it. And then the tape ended, not abruptly, not with a scream or crash, but with the slow fade of the light, like someone had gently covered the lens with their hand, as though they wanted the recording to stop exactly there, not because there was nothing more to show, but because what came after was never meant to be witnessed, not by law, not by science, not even by the dead. In the weeks that followed the tape's release into the hands of investigators and quietly into the archives of those who dealt with unspeakable findings, the story of Eva and Nate, once a ghostly rumor drifting between back-alley conversations and forgotten cataphile legends, began to unfold not as a mere disappearance, but as a chilling intersection of obsession, history, and something that seemed to exist entirely beyond the reach of rational explanation, something embedded so deeply in the city's foundations that no blueprint or map dared acknowledge it. As specialists combed through the footage frame by frame, enhancing shadows, analyzing frequencies, and cross-referencing timelines, it became clear that what Eva and Nate had stumbled upon wasn't simply an uncharted chamber, nor a forgotten crypt sealed for safety. It was something older, something curated and hidden intentionally, a space that had not only resisted time but appeared to have grown aware of those who entered it, adapting itself like a living organism that fed not on blood but on presence, memory, and the slow erosion of will. The room with the Polaroids wasn't the only one they found. As authorities widened the search, carefully navigating the unstable corridors behind the broken sewer wall, they uncovered a second chamber, larger, colder, and entirely silent, containing not images but artifacts, small personal items, watches still ticking those sealed for years. Torn pages from a journal scrawled in Eva's handwriting detailing days without light and sounds that circled their resting place at night, and next to it, a child's shoe far too small to belong to either of them, suggesting that Eva and Nate had not been the first to find themselves trapped within those corridors, and perhaps not even the most recent. But what disturbed investigators the most was that the layout of the tunnels near the sealed chamber had changed since the initial discovery. The distances were longer, the turns sharper, the marks on the walls no longer matched the earlier scans, as if the catacombs, or something within them, had responded to being found, and now twisted themselves to remain hidden again, breathing slowly, quietly folding around the memory of Eva and Nate like a crypt that knew how to forget and yet chose not to. One forensic analyst, a veteran of war zones and disaster sites, left the project without formal resignation, muttering about the final set of Polaroids they hadn't released publicly, images that appeared to be taken not by Eva, not by Nate, but by someone else entirely, someone whose position was always just behind them, someone who documented not to remember, but to possess. As if by capturing their fear in film, it could hold their essence forever, sealed behind that rusted door, breathing in their panic like perfume, devouring the seconds between heartbeats. And still, through it all, no one could say with certainty what had truly happened, whether they had died slowly in isolation, or whether something deeper, darker, had kept them for reasons that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with ritual, with presence, with something ancient that required witnesses, and when it no longer needed them, simply absorbed their story into the stones and closed the path behind them, waiting patiently for the next soul reckless enough to listen to the whispers beneath the city. There are places in this world that do not forget, not because they possess memory as humans understand it, but because they are built of memory itself, carved from centuries of stories whispered into stone, soaked with the emotions of those who passed through them, and shaped by events that left such deep scars that even time cannot smooth them away. And deep beneath Paris, beneath the pulse of the city and the laughter of tourists who stroll the avenues above unaware of the ancient veins just below their feet, there exists one such place, hidden behind walls no architect ever designed and far beyond the reach of even the bravest explorers. A chamber not marked by coordinates but by silence, by the sharp pull in the chest that tells you something is wrong before you understand why. 6 months after the second chamber had been found and quietly resealed, long before the media could turn the tragedy into spectacle, the case of Eva Zu and Nate was declared officially closed, not because answers had been found, but because those involved had seen enough, felt enough, heard enough to know that pursuing what remained in those tunnels any further meant inviting something into the world that was never meant to be unearthed again, something that had been buried for a reason, something that understood watchers better than they understood it. And so the corridors were quietly bricked over, access points collapsed, maps erased, and those who had seen the Polaroids firsthand signed confidentiality orders not just out of duty, but out of fear that speaking the truth aloud might give it shape once more. But even in silence, stories don't die, they travel, reshaped by breath, twisted through retellings, and passed on in fragments. And soon a myth began to form, one that never used Eva or Nate's names directly, but spoke of a couple who followed the wrong path into the earth, who discovered a room lined not with bones or gold, but with still photographs so saturated with fear that the air around them grew thick. Photographs that capture not death, but the moments just before it, again and again. Like the lens itself had developed a taste for dread, and while most dismissed it as urban folklore, a chilling tale traded between late-night adventurers and internet forums, others knew better, others had seen the footage, touched the peeling corners of those Polaroids, felt the weight of stillness in that hidden room, and they understood that the story lived on not because people believed it, but because the place itself demanded to be remembered. Years passed, but the weight of what had been found never fully lifted, not from the officials who had entered that space, nor from the analysts who had studied the footage and still woke some nights with the image of Eva's eyes burned behind their eyelids, not fearful, not angry, but hollow in a way that suggested not pain nor death, but erasure, as though she hadn't simply vanished, but had been peeled away from the world in pieces so small that even memory had trouble holding on to them. And that's what haunted them most. The idea that whatever had taken her had done so patiently, slowly, with purpose, not out of rage or chaos, but out of a need to consume her presence so completely that even time could no longer touch her. And then, one quiet evening in 2010, long after the story had faded from public conversation, a boy no older than 12, whose family had just moved into a flat above the old metro tunnels, came home clutching an object his parents didn't recognize at first, a Polaroid, yellowed at the edges but perfectly preserved, the kind of photo that shouldn't have survived the damp soil of the underground, and in the image, blurred but unmistakable, was a woman with a familiar face, standing in a tunnel. With her hand pressed against the wall, her expression unreadable but her eyes unmistakably Eva's, staring not at the camera, but at something just behind it. Something out of frame, something the child said was a tall man with no skin. Though when asked again, he couldn't remember where he had found the photo, only that he woke up from a dream with it in his hand, and that since that night, the corner of his room near the floor stayed cold, even when the windows were shut. Investigators reopened the file quietly, away from public view, and cross-referenced the photo with the originals, same format, same chemical breakdown, same camera lens distortion, and while some dismissed it as a hoax or a misplaced artifact, others couldn't ignore the detail, the way the dust on Eva's clothes matched exactly the samples from the original site, or the fact that behind her, barely visible, was a new symbol carved into the wall, one not present in any previous photos, a jagged spiral with a line running through it like a wound, and then, just days later, the apartment above the tunnels was vacated overnight, the family leaving behind furniture, clothing, even food still on the table, no note, no forwarding address, only a voicemail left on the landlord's answering machine where a woman whispered, "He's still down there, he's still watching, he never stopped." And so the question remains, not just where Eva and Nate went, or what they found, or who, or what, was with them in that final hour, but whether the thing that watched them has ever truly stayed in the dark, or whether it simply waits, deeper now, hungrier perhaps, listening for the sound of footsteps echoing through the wrong tunnel, waiting for a voice to call out in curiosity, for a camera to blink once and flash, for someone to forget the rules and wander just a little too far, because the room, the one lined with Polaroids, the one where no one ever runs but everyone seems to look back, is still there, just a few turns past where the light fails, and it is not empty, not forgotten, not abandoned. It waits, as it always has, as it always will, for the next story to begin.